Funding for Outdoor Idaho is made possible by your contributions to the Friends of Idaho Public Television, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and the State of Idaho.
August 23rd, 1805. At 4 miles, we came to a place the horses could not pass without going into the river. The river is almost one continued rapid. The passage with canoes is entirely impossible, as the water is confined between huge rocks and the current beating from one against another for some distance below. William Clark.
Thus did Idaho's Salmon River first enter American literature, as the one obstacle to turn back the Lewis and Clark expedition. Partly by accident of its geology, partly by human design, the salmon remains as wild today as it was 200 years ago. The longest undammed river in the lower 48, with a history as storied and fascinating as any river in America. Today, this wildness is a magnet that draws people from all over the world to swim and raft its waters, to revel in its sublime landscapes and its wildlife, to trace the tracks of its history dating back to Lewis and Clark.
It must be crushing disappointment to have looked at these mountains that they had to face and some really hard choices. And so it was a real hard struggle. Do we go down this river or do we give it up and go over the top by horseback? And to me, that's the draw. What if? What if they had gone down the river?
The Salmon River country. It beats like a wild heart in the center of a rugged state. You can judge a river by the company it keeps, by the mountains that grace its shores. The Salmon River is in wondrous company. The Sawtooth and White Cloud Mountains welcome its headwaters near Galena Summit. The Lost River Range, the Lemhis, the Bitterroots and the Bighorn Crags, the Clearwater Mountains and the Seven Devils. Some of Idaho's most famous mountain ranges rise up along the river's remarkable 400-mile journey through the state. Look at a map and you'll see why this is the spiritual heart of Idaho. The river cuts north and east and west and south, every direction on the compass, before finally emptying into the Snake River in Hell's Canyon. In the lower 48, the Salmon is the longest river contained in a single state. Its tributaries, the Middle Fork and the South Fork, drain a wilderness area that is the largest outside of Alaska. Some have called this the spiritual heart of our nation. Talk to people who have grown up in sight of the river, and they will tell you of its importance to them and to us.
It's entertainment. I liken it to a mall in a big city. In Salmon, in Chalice, North Fork, there's nothing to do in the town really, so people wander to the river. They wander to the beaches, they wander to the fish holes, they wander into the groves, and for kids, when I was growing up, it was a source of real entertainment. We swam, we boated. It's great entertainment, always moving, always changing, always talking back. The Salmon River stands out in this state as the heart, the main artery. Everyone knows it. Everyone imagines they can go and fish on it, float on it. It's a river that's loved.
The Nez Perce called it Not-So-Coos, Chinook salmon water. And to the Lemhi Shoshone, Sacagawea's people, it was Agapah, big fish water. Miners who discovered gold along its banks came to know it as the Forbidden River. Its fierce rapids and deep canyon enough to frighten even the most rabid gold seeker. By the 1870s, Northern Pacific Railroad officials were calling it the Impracticable River. Surveyors plotted a course along the Salmon, believing it shorter and preferable to the more northerly route by Lake Pend Oreille. But the survey only proved what others had already come to understand. The Salmon River country would not be tamed. By the 1880s, it had become clear that the best way to get mining equipment and supplies downstream of Salmon City was to use the river itself. Soon, wooden scows with two large poles at bow and stern became a common sight, and men like Harry Gulicki were the river's new heroes.
He was a large man, and the boats he ran were 28 to 38 feet long and heavily loaded. I think he risked his boat and all the stuff that was on it every time he went down the river, and he didn't always win. But he knew what he was doing, and in places he improved the channel with some dynamite. He was a master of his craft and taught the future masters his skills.
At the end of each trip, the boats would be sold for scrap, and the captain would find another way home. And so the Salmon received a new name, the River of No Return. It's a name still in use today, even though motorized boats and jet boats have been traveling upstream against the current for half a century. To dare to live alone is the rarest courage, someone once wrote. Whether courage or merely an inability to cope, the Salmon River has attracted an interesting mix of hardy souls who relished the solitary life.
They're a different personality that comes out and lives under those conditions. You would expect them to be a little different. At least I expected them to be a little different.
Omer Drury remembers many of the river's characters. Drury was a medical doctor in the community of Troy, Idaho. And in his spare time, he ran an outfitting business. His first rafting trip on the Salmon was in 1962. That's when he started bringing along a 16mm movie camera to document his encounters with old-timers like Frank Lance.
He was an old man by the time I got acquainted, and as I first visited with him, he said, "I built all the trails in this part of the canyon." I thought, well, you're getting old, Frank, and maybe you're exaggerating a little, but he had built most of the trails. I also met Hank the Hermit. He took us out and showed us his cellar. His cellar was in a pit that turned out to be a shaft he was digging down to find gold. He had an idea that there'd be an underground stream, and if he got to that underground stream, it'd be full of gold. He had books of addresses. He was going to visit everybody when he found that gold. Next down the river in our time was probably Francis. And if you came in unexpected on Francis and she didn't like the way you reacted when she saw you, she told you to get off the place. If she liked you, which she did us, why, she was offended if you didn't stop and come up, and she always told us, you can bring your friends on up. She loved to be dressed up and sometimes would bake a cake and come down to the river and eat lunch with the group.
Perhaps the most colorful of this rare breed was Sylvan Hart, who arrived in the canyon in the 1930s at the height of the Great Depression. In his handwritten autobiography, Hart wrote, "My reaction to the Depression was to find a place with natural resources to defeat it. I could have found no better place than Salmon River. I spent some $50 a year then for what little I needed to buy." The man others came to call Buckskin Bill lived along the south bank of the Salmon River at 5 Mile Bar for close to 50 years.
Buckskin enjoyed just stopping. We used to speculate on which one of the good-looking young ladies of the group that Buckskin would choose to dress up in a costume. Joan of Arc, I remember, was one of his characters. If there was kids along, he liked to ask them if they liked kittens and bring out a jar of cougar kittens that he had preserved, besides these things that he'd made, these guns and his knives. And it was real craftsman work. Very proud of that big, over an inch bore. I don't know whether you'd call it a gun, a rifle, almost a cannon, but it was to be held and shot. He never demonstrated it for us, but he explained and showed us the ball. You had to have a piece of cloth through it to keep it from spinning like a baseball. It would curve, so you had to keep it straight. I got the impression that most of them were uncomfortable with too close of neighbors, that they liked to have some choice of their neighbors and who they visited with, and were very personal about their time, so that you didn't want to infringe. If you infringed too much, you wouldn't be welcome. They always treated me real nice. Oh, I cherish the memories of, they put a life to the canyon. Those people are not being replaced, as the governmental agencies are getting a hold of the property. On Lance, they had his property before he died, that they had gotten him to sign that over to them. Hank the Hermit, they put a match to his building just as quick as they could get there after he died. So they're destroying some of those things so that we don't have them, even the buildings, for posterity.
But there were more than hermits on the river. At the turn of the century, a series of working ranches sprang up in the canyon, many with their own airstrip. Mackay Bar, situated at the confluence of the South Fork and the main Salmon, was one of the more successful ranches. It had been a favorite winter camp for the sheep-eater Shoshone Indians in the 18th and 19th centuries. In the 1950s and 60s, Mackay Bar was the home of outfitter Al Tice. Al and Mary Tice worked hard to turn Mackay Bar into a popular sportsman's resort. The ranch benefited from having one of the best airstrips in the backcountry, making it an access point on the river.
Well, the customers would fly in, most of them come in from McCall. They'd fly into Mackay Bar, and then we would take them from there on a trip, whatever they wanted, whether the boat trip on the river or a fishing trip up the streams. Everybody had a good time. Everybody enjoyed the outdoor life, and the scenery was nice, the food was good. We always was top number one on food. We always tried to be the best.
Before his death, Al Tice gave us a flavor of life along the Salmon River with these narrated home movies.
This was the corral there at Mackay Bar. See, we had a bunch of young horses here. We raised a great number of horses of our own. Nothing like having a dog in there to keep them running around the corral. Here we go. We're going to make the jumps now. Look at that. There's Mary Jane. She's on trigger. Pretty hard to beat Mary Jane. That's all she lives for is horses. There she is now. She's going to change the saddle right quick. Sissy now, she's riding old Banjo. Banjo gets a lot of work out. The kids all love him. Everybody was excited about the trip, taking a horse down the river in a boat to go to a rodeo. Most people haven't heard of anything like that. Mary Jane's going to coax it a little bit with a little grain. There goes the horse on the boat. There are several big rapids on this river. One of them is called Chittum, Dried Meat. They're both big rapids. They're bad enough when you're empty, but going through with a big horse in the boat's quite a trick. There's the horse. He's coming right out of there and just lickety-split. He thought that's great. There's Buckskin Billy right there, him and Dick Tice. Old Buckskin, he's quite a guy. There he is. There's Dick. Well, I thought you'd like to see these. You knew something went on around Mackay Bar and the Tice Bunch anyway.
Well, we had a lot of fun together. We had a good time together. And the guy said, "Don't you want to catch another steelhead?" Well, I said, "I've caught a little more than my share." how about shooting elk? I said, well, I've got plenty of elk in my life and plenty of deer, and which is the truth, you know.
He was a true pioneer. He had pioneered the use of jet boats on the Salmon. And he was a pilot, a good pilot. And there wasn't very much about the backcountry he didn't know a lot about.
Businessman Robert Hansberger purchased Mackie Bar in 1969 and kept L. Tice on as manager. Hansberger quickly discovered the importance of bringing young executives here to the mountains.
They are much more inclined to think more broadly, simply because the atmosphere was much more conducive to objective thought.
Hansberger became good friends with Mackie Bar's nearest neighbor, Buckskin Bill.
When Buckskin had squatted on the people's land, there was a movement to evict him by the Forest Service. And he built a fort out of rock with gun ports in it. It was built so that anybody who came after him couldn't attack from the rear. And he made a #2 shotgun. He said, I've got it sighted in so that I can sink any boat that comes down by river. I think significantly the whole thing was a bit of a joke. He had plenty of time, and he liked to fool people. He didn't tell lies, but he told some pretty good stories.
This is the scene on a typical summer day on the main Salmon and its famous tributary, the Middle Fork. The same notions that brought Buckskin Bill to the canyon now bring a new generation. They also want to escape the rat race and be transported back to a simpler time, to test their skills against the elements, to feel young again. Each year, more than 10,000 individuals float through the Middle Fork's wilderness corridor. Another 8,000 float the main Salmon. To get on the river, a person can opt for an outfitted excursion with knowledgeable guides handling food and shelter and oaring duties. Or a person can beat the odds in the Forest Service lottery. You have a 30-to-1 chance, for example, of drawing a Middle Fork permit. If you're successful, you're assured a launch date and can invite upwards of 24 friends. On most summer days, the Forest Service allows 4 launches. However one gets on the river, the rewards are the same. For many, this is the premier whitewater experience in the West, with a boating history dating back to Lewis and Clark.
I consider it, in terms of a boating history, the most storied American river, second only to the Colorado River and Grand Canyon. But of course, that history doesn't start as early as Lewis and Clark.
Court Connolly has gathered artifacts on the river's boating history, like this rare poster promoting a 1926 black and white silent film shot on the Salmon.
The home movie history of the Middle Fork starts in 1926 with Henry Widener, who was from Payette, and took 3 months to go down the Middle Fork. The first trip that we know of that ran the complete river started with 2 canoes and finished with 1. And he had a 50-pound hand-cranked camera that he used to make almost 4,000 feet of film. He lost some of it in the river in a turnover. They went upriver to Shoup and found a sweep boat moored there with Monroe Hancock and Jack Cunningham ready to run it through to Riggins. So they went on down with Hancock and Cunningham. Widener's technique to get wildlife photographs involves setting out a block of salt, waiting until the game discovered it, in the meantime building a blind, and sometimes that took him as many as 10 days to get good footage of deer and elk.
In 1939, Amos Berg piloted the first rubber raft down the Middle Fork.
Amos said he ran that trip wearing Oxfords that he never got wet. They didn't really have any mishaps on that trip to speak of, but they took 16 days to go all the way to Riggins Hot Springs. There's footage here of how plentiful the salmon were in Bear Valley in those days when you were allowed to gig them. And of course, that plenitude is probably gone forever. The men used to eat the fish for dinner and for breakfast. This is footage of Amos Berg running Pistol Creek Rapid. Berg died several years ago, and some of his ashes were scattered on the Middle Fork and the main Salmon, the Snake River, and other rivers that he ran.
Doc Frazier led that 1939 expedition, and one of the highlights was meeting the hermit of Impassable Canyon, a man even other hermits found a little strange.
I'd say Parrott was not your conventional Salmon River resident. Parrott genuinely didn't want human company, whereas most of the people who lived on the river were delighted to see Cap Guliki or were very pleased to visit with their neighbors who came down the trail or down the river. He lived roughly at about 3,500 to 3,800 feet in elevation in a little hanging valley up above Impassable Canyon. He had a series of wooden ladders to get up the cliffs to his place. And then, of course, he would go down to the river to pan for gold because summertime was the only time he could do that, and he needed a certain amount of gold to get a few necessities once or twice a year. So he hunted, obviously he fished. He had a large garden with a little irrigation ditch running to it from the creek. He went back and forth across the river, so he must have had some kind of little craft stashed well above the high water mark. But most of the time he would have been up at his own place, tucked away, out of sight, and certainly encountered, sometimes maybe not for years at a time.
In the autumn of 1949, another group took an outfitted trip down the River of No Return. The low water level made for some technical boating. The group saw where the first city of Salmon met its fate during a high water year. 50 years later, remarkably little has changed. The trip down the Salmon is still a memorable wilderness experience.
It's not just a day trip. Floating the Salmon or the Middle Fork is an expedition. It's an adventure. The Middle Fork, you get 100 miles of isolation. Other rivers just don't have that playful, gurgling joy that the Middle Fork has. Very entertaining river.
Well, have you ever met a river? Ever heard the wind blow? You ever seen the sunshine do up the night cold? Well, the boys are a-dancing, floating their days away. Come on down the Middle Fork and I'll show you a brand new day. Well, now, the river will hold you right down to your soul. She'll give you memories, never let you go.
The length, the space, the clarity of the water, the blue sky, you know that you're on this planet Earth and you're standing in what I would like to imagine is the center of it. And I'm just filled with awe. The Salmon River as an experience is overwhelming.
Well, have you ever met a river? Ever heard the wind blow? You ever seen that sunshine like it do up the night ago? This is my backyard, a very nice place to play. Got my friends and the good times, and we're playing it day by day. Well, now, river will hold you right down your soul. She'll give you memories, never let you go. No, no, no. But have you ever met a river? do down in Idaho. Well, have you ever met a river? Ever heard the wind blow? Ever seen that sunshine like it do up in Idaho?
Some like to read about history. Others prefer history they can taste and feel. On the banks of the Salmon River, not far from where the Lewis and Clark expedition camped in 1805, a group of buckskin-clad men have set up camp. They are part of an Idaho muzzleloaders club, specializing in the history of the American fur trade. One of their objectives has been to trace the path of Lewis and Clark through Idaho. They have studied the journals of America's most famous expedition. They've retraced on horseback their difficult journey through the Bitterroot Mountains. And now they will attempt to do something that Lewis and Clark ultimately decided not to do, to take dugout canoes down the Salmon River.
We've tried to figure out what they might be thinking, but that's like tomorrow. We're a little nervous about running the river, but we can't imagine how nervous they probably were about it. One step further.
It's not a canoe, you know, it's not a rubber raft, and when people see this log hollowed out, they're gonna think, these guys are crazy.
What happens tomorrow, and we sort of get off on that. At least we hang together as a group. and
we'll drown as a group.
And we'll all drown as a group.
It must be crushing disappointment to have looked at these mountains that they had to face and some really hard choices. Over the mountain by horseback, paths they don't know, or perhaps this river. They had traveled most of the way by river, and that's what they were trying to do, is find a water route from the Mississippi to the Pacific. And so it was a real hard struggle. Do we go down this river, or do we give it up and go over the top by horseback?
Either choice would have been a bad choice for them, and they were just trying to, at this point, decide the worst of the two evils.
And to me, that's the draw. What if? What if they had gone down the river?
I was guided for a good many years, and all I can say is they were tough guys. They were tough mentally as well as physically.
I don't think you could imagine how good of officers Lewis and Clark had to have been to keep the men together at this point.
And how dedicated the men had to have been to the officers.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to it. See if I'm as tough as I think I am.
I think we all are. I was one of the naysayers when this thing first came up, and now I'm just so jazzed I can't wait to go. Of course, that always happens after a couple of Pepsis.
Pepsis?
Lewis and Clark entered this valley in August of 1805. They had spent the past year hauling boats upriver as they followed the Missouri to its source. Now they would be heading downriver. They would have gazed on this particular stretch of the Salmon River at this exact time of year, and they must have wondered about the Shoshone Indians' warning that the river was unrunnable. So Meriwether Lewis instructed William Clark to scout ahead to see if indeed the Indians were correct.
August 23rd, 1805. At 4 miles, we came to a place the horses could not pass without going into the river. I set out with 3 men, directing those left to hunt and fish until my return. The river is almost one continued rapid. The passage with canoes is entirely impossible, as the water is confined between huge rocks and the current beating from one against another for some distance below. William Clark.
I think we've reached the point where we know that they stopped. This is a no-go part of the river. You can see how rough it is. And you can even hear it through here.
This thing has been getting steeper and steeper every mile of the way.
Yeah, this is
you
just
look
the
at
beginning.
these, there's no recovery spots, not for a piece of wood. We're going to hit these things and we're going to roll that bloody boat and we're going to keep on rolling.
Yeah, the rocks are pretty good size in here.
Every piece of gear is going to go out and we're going out. oars are going out.
Yeah.
No.
I envision it stopping right here for one boat anyway. Yeah. I also think this is probably where they actually have to take their horses into the water just to get around. If not, it's real close to it.
Yes.
But,
now we can try cordelling one of the boats through there. We might try the B boat. Cordell, it's a little bit deeper than the A boat. The A boat, I don't know about that one.
Yeah. So we're going to try one boat. If it fails, they'll cordell the second boat through then. That's about the way you guys see it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gonna do that.
I think Clark had a wise decision at this point.
Yeah.
He's
right.
He had, what, 2 years invested into this trip already?
Yeah.
Pretty much.
All the equipment?
Yeah. Yeah, they could have lost it all right here.
Yep. Yeah, this could have been the end of the Corps right in here. If they'd have tried this, they could have called her quits right at this point. Never returned.
Yeah. But even if they had made it through this one, who knows what's on farther and
That's
farther
true.
and farther.
And that's the mystery. They don't know what's on the other side, and they're actually breaking ground or breaking water by each bend in the river.
Yeah, I'll be breaking water too when I hit that.
Breaking water. Well, guys, we got it scoped out.
I think we got it.
Okay.
I think we got to do her.
Okay, let's give her a try.
Get her done.
Clark's assessment was right on. It's been a tough trip down through here. I don't think they'd have made it. I was looking to see how we could weasel through it. And I could see a 500-pound boat trying to crush somebody that fell out of it. And I thought, boy, this could be a real experience here.
Even with life vests on underneath these clothing, it hits this water, balloons up, fills up with water. You have no control. It's dragging you under.
Well, it was worth a try, but it turned out exactly the way we thought it would be. It's really too rough. Rolls and bounces you out.
A 500-pound log doesn't negotiate real quick. So I can see where a kayak handles it well, but
Rubber boat handles it great. 500-pound log is still a 500-pound log.
Yeah, getting back.
Wet or dry, it's a 500-pound log.
We had the opportunity to stop and read these rapids before we decided whether or not we were going to do it. We didn't have an expedition coming up to each one blind, unknown, and how much worse is it going to get on and on down the river.
You go through a couple of these and lose the boats, lose your gear, and you're a long ways from home.
Lose a couple of lives.
If I was out here like they were 2 years in the making, it's too much to risk. It was just too much to risk.
It's a risk putting them around there with a rope. I've got a healthy respect. What did we do, 100 yards?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe a little more.
Maybe a little more than that.
And I'm tired.
After what we went through today, I have to hand it to the Corps Discovery. The beginning of the trip, they picked out the best physical fit people. They sure did. They had
needed
to.
them.
For sure.
We weren't on that list.
No, we weren't.
No, we didn't make that list.
This canyon, just as the way it looks today, is the way Clark seen it when his survey crew come down here and looked at it. Except for the water running through, actually everything is probably still the same. And that's a special feeling when you get down in here and look at that.
I don't think it hurts a nation to preserve some of its originality. I kind of have a suspicion that a healthy country is a country that realizes that is part of its wealth and its future history. So why can't we leave some of it intact, just to enjoy it for the sake of enjoyment? Isn't that a value? I think so.
I believe it is also.
Mm-hmm.
It took 8 years, 18 congressional hearings, and 66 different versions of the bill. But finally, in 1964, the nation's national wilderness system became a reality. The vote in the House of Representatives was 373 to 1. Frank Church was the bill's floor sponsor in the U.S. Senate.
If it becomes law, we will have preserved for now and for generations yet unborn areas of unspoiled, pristine wilderness, open to the considerate use and enjoyment of nature lovers and hikers and mountain climbers, hunters and fishermen, and of all those who find in high and lonely places a refreshment of the spirit and life's closest communion with God.
16 years later, at the urging of many Idahoans, including Frank Church, Congress added what is today the largest wilderness area in the lower 48, the 2.4 million acre River of No Return wilderness. But Church knew that Idaho's primitive area would never be designated wilderness without major concessions.
The Forest Service wanted to go in and close down all the backcountry airstrips. Most people in Idaho said, well, we want the wilderness, but we don't want it that way. We want to be able to fly in there. So we wrote into the legislation that the backcountry airstrips would stay open. And that's been a constant battle ever since. Similarly, the level of jet boat traffic. You got jet boat traffic, you also have floaters. There is a conflict. Those conflicts between two different kinds of recreation use had to be balanced.
Access into this wilderness is surprisingly easy. Folks can fly into Chamberlain Basin or any of the other 17 airstrips. More than 24 trailheads allow hikers and riders access to the 1,500 miles of trails. Jet boats bring fishermen and sightseers upriver over rapids that once made this a one-way stretch.
We had reached a point in our history where there were no unused lands. A good many Idahoans would then have said, and some would still say, well, that land out there isn't being used for anything. There isn't an acre that isn't being used by someone. So I think it's just working out what was the right kind of a public policy, balancing between the several different interests that look at those public lands and recognize that they have great value.
In March of 1984, as his colleague was dying of cancer, McClure asked Congress to add the name of Frank Church to the River of No Return wilderness. The U.S. Forest Service is the agency in charge of managing this wilderness, a wilderness that straddles 4 national forests, that contains 240 bird species, 77 mammals, 23 fish, and enough vegetative variety to be a botanist's gold mine. The entire Middle Fork and parts of the main Salmon are also included in the nation's wild and scenic rivers system. It's an attempt to preserve the living landscape of a river. And it's a recognition that the River of No Return is important to our nation's heritage.
People that come to the Salmon River country, 80% of them actually either float the Middle Fork or the main. Demographically, that's the usership. We want to try to melt the two acts together, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act and the Wilderness Act. The Central Idaho Act established some very specific exceptions for the management of this wilderness. And, you know, as an agency representative, we have to be real mindful of those.
Still, the concept of wilderness seems to be more acceptable to tourists than to many of those living and working in its shadow. This is the Lemhi River Valley, where 11-year-old Sacagawea was captured and later sold to a fur trapper named Charbonneau. This is also where Lewis and Clark crossed the Continental Divide, and where they procured horses from the Lemhi Shoshone to continue their journey to the ocean. Today it is home to the largest town along the Salmon River. The small western community of Salmon, Idaho, serves the area's large cattle ranching industry. It also bills itself as the whitewater capital of the world.
The wilderness as a concept's wonderful. It's a preservation of animals and plants and all the things that make the outdoors wonderful. The locals feel, in some respects, like the Native Americans must have felt, blocked out, removed from the land that they lived on, they played on, they roamed on. And there's no sensitivity given to that. They feel that they have a special right to it because they have had a very close attachment to it. And I don't think they would abuse the land in any way, given the information, given the knowledge that they have now. But they want to wander at will. They want to have access. And my best analogy is that locals and Native Americans have something in common now. They're both on reservations, both kept out.
In 1995, wolves hit the ground running in the Frank Church River of No Return wilderness. To some, it was proof positive that the nation's Endangered Species Act was working well. To others, it was further evidence that idiocy was loose on the land.
Well, I don't think it should have been done. They should have put them somewhere where they wouldn't cause no trouble. I think that they'll probably change. It's going to make a lot of people sell out. Not me, for one. Because I can't take a beating like I did last year. There ain't no way in hell I can do it again.
You know, we're out here trying to make a living, but we're also feeding the rest of the people. And it seems like all the things that come down on the ag people, and especially those of us that run on public land. And hell, we're not the enemy. We're feeding people. You'd think somebody would back you up once in a while instead of always hitting you over the head.
The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service had determined that Yellowstone National Park and the Frank Church Wilderness were the two best places for reestablishing a gray wolf population in the West.
Really what we're trying to achieve is to generate some long-term tolerance for wolves by the folks that are most affected by the wolf recovery process, mostly people in rural communities across Idaho. Wolf recovery in Idaho isn't so much about biology or biological challenge as it is a social political challenge. It's more about addressing the values that we as a society place on wolves. It's more about working with the perceptions that we have of wolves. From a biological standpoint, it's just been about a few short years since the original wolves were released in Idaho, and already we have 12 packs and 115 wolves, and it's pretty clear at this point already that wolves have recolonized vacant habitats in Idaho very successfully. And if we can afford them the opportunity to persist, then they're here to stay.
The gray wolf does seem like a success story for the Endangered Species Act. The same, however, cannot be said of the salmon. Since the beginning of America's recorded history, this river has borne the name of the giant fish. But today the name salmon carries an added burden of guilt and bitter irony, as the salmon numbers have plummeted with the construction of each new dam on the Snake and Columbia rivers between Idaho and the ocean. The dams remain. Loggers and miners have felt the effects of restrictions placed on their livelihoods in the name of salmon restoration. Is there a lesson for us in the life cycle of a fish that journeys to the ocean and then returns to die? Poet William Studebaker thinks there is.
For me, the salmon have been kind of a symbol of a cycle of life, where you begin in a spot, you make a world journey, you return to that spot to give something back, and it's the hero cycle. It's the kind of thing Campbell talked about and Jung talked about, where we begin, we journey, and we return. This is death, you know, the instinct that drives the salmon out of the ocean and up the stream to a gravel bar to make a nest for her red. But she knows that she had to come, she had to spawn to continue the cycle, to continue her species. And at the end, she finally struggles in that cycle, and she's going to give up, and she's going to die. She's going to suffocate in the very water that gave her life, her death being the great hope. In the salmon area in the state of Idaho, we're attached. We know of this cycle of the salmon. It's very important to us, and we're fighting for it. We're fighting to preserve it.
Along a river once filled with salmon, Richard Zimmerman has built a life among the rock slides and the crevices. He lives simply, eating only what he grows.
I have a funny diet. I can't eat everything. I eat vegetables and fruit, cherries and canned up applesauce fermented in my yogurt and stuff like that.
He's a man shaped by the Salmon River environment, but he's done some shaping too, using materials found around the river.
Here's a house made out of slab wood. Got the sawmill, $10 house. Here's something. You get the rubber tires for nothing. So away. Made out of rubber tires, dirt pounded in the tires. Well, this window I cut off an old pickup, I think it was, an old Chevy, I ain't sure what it was. This is my ventilator. Open up the air, let the air in, according to how much you want. I got another ventilator on the other side.
Folks know him as Dugout Dick. He's built more than a dozen dugout structures on this talus slope by the river. Some of them he rents out for $10 a month.
This is where I live in here. I said to myself, boy, this would make a good place to make a cave. There's a lot of big rocks around. I roll them up on the plank sometimes. Other times I'll bring them down and put mud behind. And I got the idea I'll make a mine out of it. Oh, heck, it's too good for a mine. I'll make a house out of it. Then I'll put a pantry there, right there. And then I'd make my bed in there. I put mud on top and paper and painted it. Made it pretty good. I kept it working. And then winter time, I got nothing to do. I'd make it a little bigger. This is where I cook right here. And this is my cupboard here. This is an old ice box for cupboard. I can step up on here to get in my bed. This is my pantry here. I make wine and cook with wine. This is something I made the other day here. It's made out of beets and stuff. I don't drink it. I just cook with it. Here's one of my ice caves here, a bigger one, and it's got natural ice in here. I had to build a fire to make it, take the rock out of here and put it back in again and stuff like that. And I'm walking on the ice back here. And you can skate on it if you had ice skates. Here's my yogurt. This is what I eat. Made out of beets and carrots and raisins, a little flour, milk. Let's hit the spot, boy. Once you live in a cave, you don't want to live in nothing else. You don't have to chop much wood. You don't have to have no air conditioning. It's about the same temperature all the time. It's hot outside, it's warm, it's cool in here. When it's cold out here, it's warm in here. So, you know, once you live in a cave, you get used to it. You don't want to live in something else.
Of course, the hermits in the Salmon River Canyon would have considered this caveman a newcomer. He didn't arrive on the shores of the Salmon River until 1947.
I tried to be a hermit, but it didn't turn out that way. Too many people started bothering me, so I had to start charging to go in here. I got a couple of letters from Johnny Carson a long time ago, but I told him, heck, the show was up here. It ain't down there. I don't ride airplanes anyway. Oh, yeah. Come from Europe. I had Japanese people, Indian people. I had a guy with the turbans on, he call it. I had one of them guys come in here. Another guy bring him in here. But I can't show you. The goat ate the roster up. You got to watch your Bible, too. Show you the Bible, too.
Now, approaching his 9th decade and in failing health, Dugout Dick has learned to accept his fate, just like Buckskin Bill before him. He's a legend in his own time.
All right.
All around the water.
Hardly a year goes by without a forest fire somewhere in the Salmon River country. These forests are born of fire, and fire is the ignition key that allows the cycle of growth and regeneration to continue. But by any measurement, the fires of 2000 were extraordinary. A buildup of dead, dry fuels, a summer of hot, dry weather, and lightning storms in August created the worst fire season in recent memory. Fires blackened 1.3 million acres in Idaho. In the Frank Church River of No Return wilderness, more than 500,000 acres burned, more than in any single year in the last century. Decades of aggressive fire suppression have left the forest with too much fuel. In until we deal with that, fire officials say, we can expect more of the same next summer. Along the middle fork of the Salmon, the nation's premier whitewater river, the 2000 fires were a mixed blessing. Pete Zamowski ventured into the Middle Fork country in October of 2000, a few weeks after the fires had raced through the canyon.
The one thing I really do remember is when our plane flew over Pistol Creek, my heart just sank. I saw this blackened canyon there where it just looked like it was nuked, and Pistol Creek itself was burned, and it was burned buildings. In fact, there was a lot of spots just nothing left, just the kind of like the spots in between all the trees where the cabins were. And that really kind of shocked me, and I said, oh boy, I don't know what to expect. When we finally launched and when we started going down the river, we noticed that there was still portions along both sides that were burned, but as soon as we got maybe, I would say somewhere around 4 miles below Indian Creek, bam, it was back to the old Middle Fork that we know and love. And then as we came around the bend and we pulled off at the B, you could see where the undergrowth was burned. And I remember getting out of the boat and I was kind of going, okay, we're walking up to the B, and then we come over the ridge and there's the old lodge there, just the way it always been, and that little thing with the antlers and the grassy lawn in the front, man, it was still there. So we kind of, talked with the people at the B, and they took us on a little tour up the creek bed through there, and man, that was depressing. There was this carcass of a coyote in the creek bed. He was honkered down. It was like he was honkered down, and he was waiting for the fire to go over him. Well, it didn't go over him, and you can start to see now evidence of silt coming down that creek. It was a black goop in the river. I mean, I put my paddle down, and it had come up with black slime on it that was coming down from the creek. The bridge, the bridge that was lifted off its pilings you kind of just went, duh, what could do this? So, getting in there just right shortly after the fire and wondering what had happened, I mean, it was kind of a gift to us to be down in there to see just what was going on.
In the Salmon River country, there lurks a threat that is even more insidious than wildfire: noxious weeds. These non-native plants can turn a dynamic, productive landscape into a barren wasteland.
They see the noxious weeds and they see a beautiful flower. But the devastating part of that is the potential to change the ecosystems here in the River Canyon, to eliminate the natural plants, the native plants, to be taken over by a noxious weed. When you start losing the native plants, those are what the wildlife species rely on here. And I don't know of anything that probably eats knapweed. And so when you have big game and other species that are dependent on grasses and forbs, and it's taken over by knapweed, you're going to have a lot of animals that are going to have a tough time surviving.
In the canyon here, we've been pulling weeds for about 3 years. We've had as many as 20, 25 volunteers. If we can get those people to interact with their peers that float the river, and if we could get 5% of the visitors down the river pulling the knapweed over a 3 to 5 year period, we really feel that we will actually be reducing the infestations down significantly. And the more it's reduced, the less likelihood there is of a seed source getting up into the adjacent uplands and taking off.
To the casual observer, the Salmon River country has changed little in 50 years. Yet others may suggest that the changes have been immense. Fewer salmon and more wolves. Bigger fires and more weeds. People and towns in transition from a resource-based economy to one heavily dependent upon the tourist dollar. Preserving the integrity of one of the nation's largest wild ecosystems is a challenge, but it is also an opportunity. The nation's second deepest river gorge divides us north and south. But it also binds us in the knowledge that we are the custodians of something special. Those who live here know that. Those who visit here experience that. For this is the remnant heart of America. And through it all runs a river, as wild and free-flowing as it was at the birth of our nation, with a history as grand as any river in the West, and a future as promising as our imagination.
Sit on the shore and watch the waters go. I send my thoughts out to that swirling flow. I hear the sounds of waters roaring, see the huts above me soaring down, down. And then we ride, and then we ride on that river running down throughout that canyon on its way back home. It's just a river running down, river running.
Funding for Outdoor Idaho is made possible by your contributions to the Friends of Idaho Public Television, by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and the State of Idaho. All Outdoor Idaho programs are available on video cassette, including hour-long specials from the best of Outdoor Idaho called Imagine Idaho, Idaho's Scenic Splendor, and the Whitewater State. To order, call our 800 number. For more details about this show and other Idaho Public Television offerings, look for us on the World Wide Web